Welcome to Bike World. From sports bikes to adventure bikes and everything in between, we bring you all the latest action from the world of two wheels. My name's John Hogan. I'm one of the presenting team here at Bike World. I've been a full-time motorcycle journalist for the last 15 years. It's my job on the show to do all of the new bike press launches. I do the features, interviews, pretty much have a hand in everything that's going on. It's not just me though, part of the presenting team involves Dan. Dan's been a full-time mechanic for 20 years. This is his workshop. He's our trusted hands when it comes to all of the technical and detailed features that you should be doing in a workshop.
And I'm Chris Northover, and I live here in Wales, and you can catch me doing nonsense like this. Coming up on this week's show, I am going to go and ride a KTM Duke 890R and see if it's as bonkers as they say, or if it actually makes a good road bike as well. And then later on, we're going to have a look and see how that compares to Ducati's Hypermotard 950 SP. One is a mad Italian V-twin, the other is a mad Austrian parallel twin, but they're actually pretty different bikes. Check it out and see what we found out. Some manufacturers make bikes that look pretty. Some manufacturers make bikes that look purposeful. Some manufacturers make bikes that look really angry. KTM is that manufacturer. This is their new 890 Duke R, and it just looks so angry. If it was in a pub, you'd definitely go and have your beer somewhere else. The Duke has an 890cc parallel twin engine, makes 121 horsepower, and they're claiming a dry weight of 166 kilos. I think we can safely assume about 180 kilos fully wet. So that is a punchy, lightweight bike in a really, really compact chassis. I always think you can tell quite a lot about a bike and a lot about what the manufacturer intends the bike to be used for by the tyres they come on. These Dukes come on, they might as well be racing slicks, mightn't they? That's a Michelin Power Cup 2. We were actually on track a couple of weeks ago on a GSX-R1000 on them. That is a really, really aggressive sports tyre. It's a track day tyre. It's a slick with a token few tread cuts in it to get through the homologation laws for road use. That kind of points at where KTM see this bike. It says it's a bike for being a hooligan on, and that's very KTM of them. Throughout this bike, it has got super high performance and kind of sports track orientated components. It's got WP Apex forks and shocks. It's got massive, massive Brembo discs with huge monoblock calipers on it. It's got lightweight wheels. It's got a quick shifter. That's optional, but this one's got it on. You can even change the gear linkage round to make it run a race shift pattern to a reverse shift pattern for track use. Everywhere you look, it's like it's a race bike, but they fitted the wrong bodywork and the wrong handlebars. Potentially, it could be an incredibly fun road bike, or is it just going to be a hard, harsh, crashy mess and actually unpleasant to ride on the road? I'm bored of talking about it. I've been dying to ride this bike all year, so let's get out, stick it on the mountain pass, wind the throttle open and see what she does. I think that KTM 890 Duke R is my favourite road bike of the moment. This moment right now. Obviously this moment right now it is because I've just got off it and I'm really happy. But I think that is the best road sports bike I've ridden in my life, which is a big exaggeration. But no, it's not. I think it's true. It is a fantastic road bike. Where I'm confused is KTM's called this the Scalpel, something daft like that. They've told us it's brilliant on track. It has track mode, it's got track tyres. Yeah, I'm sure, but it's an awesome road bike. I feel like it's almost doing it an injustice to go on about how good it is on track, because that thing is probably the ultimate road sports bike. I couldn't think of any bike I'd have rather ridden on those mountain passes today than this KTM 890 Ducati. That's high praise. I didn't want to like it as much as I do, but I really do. What makes a great road sports bike? And why have I come to this rather superlative filled conclusion? Well, to be honest, the tank range isn't amazing. The wind protection's garbage. The mirrors are lovely. The mirrors are good. Is the seat comfy on a motorway? Don't know, didn't try it. It was comfy enough for a few hours of blatting around mountain roads. The luggage capacity, terrible. Pillion seat, pillion foot pegs, nope, none of them on this one. Yeah, it's not a very practical bike, but for going for a ride and making every corner really fun, it's awesome. It's brilliant. A couple of things that made it work particularly well. One, awesome brakes. As anyone who rides fast on the road knows, sometimes you have to stop, sometimes things come the other way that you didn't expect. And knowing that with genuinely one finger on the front brake all day, I could stop the bike in a heartbeat, stand it on the front wheel in no time at all. That lets you kind of push a little bit faster when you're trying to ride to as far as you can see, and having the confidence that at any time you can whack on that front brake and the thing will stop on a dime. That makes riding fast on the road fun. I think the trick they've pulled as well is, you know, loads of people have got those big Brembo discs and monoblock calipers on their bikes. This thing's really light. It's, yeah, 166 kilos dry, which, whatever that is wet, it's still a very light sports bike. And then you've got cornering ABS, you've got Supermoto mode ABS, which lets you slide the rear tyre but keeps ABS on the front. So you've got a really perfect storm for stopping in a very short space of time. And the reason you need to stop is you'll probably be going a bit too fast. Almost certainly. Even in KTM's literature, it says it has an LED headlight, so when you appear from nowhere, people can see you. I think they expect hooligans to buy this thing. Yeah, that motor, parallel twins are a very fashionable engine right now. In the last few years, every manufacturer, I think, has bought out a parallel twin, bar Ducati. This one's got a really good blend of kind of torque and power in the lower rev range, where you're using it on, you know, every time you're riding, every road, every corner, you can be in high gear, just rolling on, and it pulls nice shove out the corner. And then you can hang on to the revs and it screams. It doesn't get peaky at the top, but it keeps building and building and making more and more power in a way that's, I'm going to describe as Goldilocks. It's fast enough that you get a buzz from it and you make good progress, but it's not so ballistically fast that you're then going, oh my god, I'm going to die or go to jail, or both. It's kind of a sweet spot. 121 horsepower, I think, is a pretty good amount of power for a road bike, and this bike kind of delivers it pretty damn perfect. We've got go, we've got stop. Those are the two most important bits. The stuff in between, chassis, that is where this bike surprised me the most. Given historically KTM's ability to build mental, slightly focused, slightly too edgy motorcycles, if we think back to the original KTM Super Dukes and the Super Duke Rs, they were awesome bikes, but they were harsh, hard, uncompromising, uncomfortable at times, downright bonkers things. Given that history, and given they called this the Scalpel and have been battering on about how good it is on track, I really expected this thing to be a rigid board of a bike. I expected it to be clattering over the bumps, skipping around in the middle of the corner. I expected it to be pretty uncompromising for anything but smooth roads and 100% commitment. I honestly couldn't have been more wrong. I quite like being wrong sometimes, because it means we get a much better bike than negative Chris expected. It's got the WP Apex forks and shock, but what's interesting is they've got 140mm travel front, 150mm rear, which is maybe 10 to 20mm more than you'd expect on your typical sports bike. And then that translates well into the ride on the road, because on fast flowy roads and those mountain switchbacks where you're changing direction quickly, chucking the bike around all over the place, if a bike's too soft, if a bike's too compliant, it's all this wallowing and wobbling and you can't get it to settle and you have to kind of wait for the bike before you can stick it into a corner. It didn't do that. It just changed direction. As soon as you flicked it onto its side, it stayed there, and it was very well behaved in that sort of fast, aggressive riding. And then at the other end of the spectrum, when you're riding really bumpy corners, some of those mountain turns are quite bad tarmac and the corners are real bumpy in the middle of the corner. Corner, corner, corner. How many times can I say corner? And then I rode some roads that were like deliberately bad. So potholes, lumps, gravel, stones, everything. And normally a bike that behaves in the high speed stuff by having stiff suspension. Then when you put it on that, low speed, mucky, horrible, gnarly, rough stuff, it'd be chattering and bouncing all over the place. And this didn't do that either. It behaved really well in both situations, which I think is a pretty impressive feat. And there's no clever electronic suspension trickery. It's just good quality suspension, set up really well, and with a little more travel to cope with those rough roads. Not rocket science, clever, and I'm going to say pure in a way. There's no electrical gimmickry disguising anything. It just is a well sorted, well set up chassis that lets you get the most out of the brakes, the tyres and the suspension and the engine. And on that note, I don't think I'm going to give it back. I think I'm going to keep it and not tell KTM where I've moved to, because I'm quite taken by this thing. There is, of course, a bunch of electronical trickery on this bike. There is a TFT dash, there is a quick shifter, I mentioned the ABS, traction control, ride-by-wire throttle, blah, 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 blah. Loads of clever bits. TFT dash actually gave me all the information I needed, and it was easy to scroll through the different rider modes. Why would you want to do that? It is quite different across the modes. This one's got the optional track mode on it. If you put it in rain or street mode, it's a bit of a pussycat, super soft on the throttle. That made sticking at 30 mile an hour for 3 miles of boring village riding, that made that super easy. Then switching it to the track mode and the more aggressive throttle response, sticking at 30 mile an hour didn't really happen. It just went rap, 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 and wants to take off all the time, which was awesome fun on the open road, but a pain in the backside in the village. Switching between them was a good idea and actually pretty easy on this control and this dash. In track mode, you can then turn things like wheelie control off, in case you need to maybe do a wheelie. You always need to do a wheelie on this bike. You can also turn the ABS into Supermoto mode, which lets you slide the rear tyre. So there's a few little nuances in those settings that you'll find your own way with, but yeah, it's nice that you can get to them, change them, and they're easy to adjust. The quick shifter, up and down quick shifter, that did my favourite thing. When you full gas, in track mode, shifting up hard, it goes rom, rom, rom. I probably did 4 times more gear shifts than I needed to, just because the noise made me smile so much. I did have a couple of times when my foot was touching the lever and it just made the engine cut out. I don't know if that's particularly this bike or my foot position or what. So I had a couple of little incidences of that, but nothing that really spoilt my ride. There must be something bad about it. There has to be something bad about it. The orange wheels get dirty really easy. That's a bad thing. That's terrible. You know, you'd have to keep cleaning them. I used all of the fuel and now I've got to fill it up again. Maybe that's a bad thing, I don't know. Yeah, I'm struggling. I'm racking my brains to think of something I don't like about this bike. I like naked sports bikes. I like bikes that are fun to ride on the road, and it has those boxes ticked really, really well. I ride loads and loads of different motorbikes. That's not meant to be a brag. I'm quite lucky, but yeah, it's not meant to be a brag, but it's to qualify what I'm about to say. I jump from bike to bike to bike. I keep bikes for a week at a time, 2 weeks at a time, then jump to the next one. I've got a few of my own bikes as well, so I'm always on and off. I never really ride the same bike for more than 2 or 3 days running. And doing that, you notice a lot of very subtle things about bikes, and you notice which bikes are fundamentally easy to ride and confidence inspiring from the minute you get on them. Certain bikes do this really, really well. Everyone knows it, but that great big German weird engined adventure bike, the GS, that is a good example of that. It's a bike that, love it or hate it, it's really easy to get on and ride fast. It gives you confidence. The original, I'm not going to say the original, the 2012, 2013 era Duke 690, the single cylinder one, exactly the same thing. It was a bike that the minute you sat on it, it was light, it was compact, it was nimble, but it never felt intimidating. It was really easy to get on and ride. Street Triple, another good example, the original Triumph Street Triple, a bike that you just jumped on and immediately you felt like you've been riding it for 20 years already. That doesn't happen very often with a sports-orientated bike. By their nature, they're aggressive, they're fast, they're a bit tall, they're stiff. A bike like this that's pitched as an edgy, hard sports track bike, I jumped on it this morning, having never ridden it before. Cold, damp, greasy road, and it just felt like I've been riding it for every day for the last 3 months. It was so easy to get on with. Nothing was snappy, nothing was pushing me out of my comfort zone straight away. When I wanted to go fast, it went fast, and when I wanted to bimble along and avoid the wet leaves, it did that. It steered where I expected it, braked when I expected it, went on the gas when I expected, which sounds like stuff you should take for granted on a bike, but believe me, when you ride everything, some stuff is at this end of the scale where it's really, really hard work, and some stuff is at this end of the scale where it's natural and effortless. And that, I think, is probably why I'm waxing lyrical so much about this bike. All the spec stuff, all the fancy bits, all the Brembo brakes and the bright orange wheels and all that stuff is great, but it's no use if you can't use it and you don't feel confident and comfortable using it. And that's the trick this bike pulls. How or why or what numbers make that happen, I have no idea. I'm not sure any of the engineers at these places do either. I think it's one of those things that sometimes the bike comes together and it's just right. And that 890 Duke R is just right. They've done a blinding job of making an easy to ride bike that can go as mad as you want to or as calm as you want to. And at 10,399, so just under 10.5 grand, it's a hell of a lot of fun for your money. And if your thing is riding fast, twisty roads, classic sports bike stuff, and the odd track day, go and have a go on one of these. Tell us what you think, because I'm hard pushed to find something I don't like about it. So which is better? This KTM Duke 890R or the Ducati Hyper Motard? It's a bloody good question. I've been lucky enough to ride both these bikes recently. Not back to back, so it's hard to draw exact comparisons, but I did ride both bikes in exactly the same locations with pretty similar conditions, so I got a pretty good feel of how they compare directly to each other. On the face of it, they're both kind of hooligan-y road bikes. They're both 120-ish horsepower, and they're both 185-ish kilos, and actually similar price. Ducati's 11 grand, this is nearly 11 grand. So on paper, yeah, this probably has the edge on weight, power and price, but it's in the ballpark. And they should be pretty similar bikes based on everything when you look at them. They actually really couldn't be more different. I think the biggest thing is you have to remember these bikes are totally different engines. They're both twin cylinders, but this is a parallel twin. 2 cylinders going up and down like that. That looks awful when I do that. The Ducati is a V-twin, so cylinders kind of pointing in different directions. That might not sound like it should make a huge difference, but that dictates a lot about a bike. Parallel twins could be much more compact, much more tightly packed around the bike, and a V-twin takes up a lot more space, so the bike changes its shape to fit that. Secondly, the way they deliver their power. The parallel twins and the V-twins are kind of not polar opposite power delivery, but a V-twin loves to make its power down low, loves to make torque, and has that kind of booming engine note that feels like you can drive from anywhere. Parallel twins traditionally like to rev a bit more. Again, there's a lot of mucking around with different crank setups that affects how a parallel twin makes its power. So this isn't a particularly revvy parallel twin, but it does make less sort of oomph off the throttle than you get when you're riding the Hyper Motard. That makes the riding experience a very different thing. This thing is smooth, there's no step in the power, it's really, really soft when you come on the throttle, but then when you go hard on the throttle, the power builds and it comes. The Ducati always feels to me very instant. The minute you touch the gas, it's chomping at the bit and trying to pop the front wheel out and run away from you. The chassis, again, couldn't be more different. This is a sports bike. This is a sports bike with slightly longer suspension travel, but that's exactly what it feels like to ride. It's like a really good, compliant road sports bike. The Ducati it's a supermoto, I think. It's tall, it's got much more suspension travel, and it feels it. You sit right up on top of it. When you're sat on the Ducati, you can't see anything in front of you other than road and scenery, and you really do feel like you're on a more of a supermoto style bike. You're sat tall on top of it, and it rides like that. If you're braking hard into the corners and pitching it in, it works really well and it's good fun. If you're kind of just rolling along casually, sometimes it does feel a bit tall and you're kind of sat up away from the tyres a bit. It's not a positive or a negative thing particularly, it's just a very different feeling to this. This feels more like a normal sports bike with wide handlebars, and so it depends what sort of a riding experience you're after. If you're in the city, black between traffic lights, Hypermotard is an absolute blast. If you're looking for a sports bike really, but you want something with wide bars that's a bit more comfortable, then maybe the Duke's a better bet for you. In terms of the equipment the bikes have got on, yeah, it's amazing. Now, 11 grand might still seem like a lot of money for a bike to some people, but when you look at the spectrum of bike prices, these are kind of cheaper mid-range bikes, and they've got everything you'd expect on them. They've got quick shifters up and down, they've got traction control that's adjustable, they've got really good ABS systems, they've got TFT dashes that have got everything you could ever want to know on them. Like the kit on the bikes it's awesome. And there's not really anything to choose between the Ducati and the KTM in terms of their equipment that it offers the rider. Which brings me down to how do they feel to ride? Honestly, this is easy to ride. I love the Ducati. I've ridden the 950, the 950 SP and the new 950 RVE, and I love that Hypermotard, and it's a really good fun thing, but hands down, the Duke 890 is an easier bike to ride. It just feels natural when you got on it. The clutch is a little bit lighter, the throttle's a little bit more predictable. The bike feels lighter. I think that's because it's lower, so you don't feel like you're perched so high on top of it like you do with the Ducati. But it's definitely an easier bike to ride, and that translates into a little bit more comfortable to ride quick on the road on it. And if you're mucking around doing stunts, it's a little easier to get on with there. Sounds like I'm being a bit downer on the Ducati here. I'm not, it's just a different thing. The Ducati is, I don't want to use the phrase it's a typical Ducati, but I'm going to do everything I can not to say that. The Ducati is a different engine, so it's a nice drivey V-twin, lots of torque, lots of power, great for throttle on wheelies. Weirdly, it's a bit more of a hooligan bike than this, which, given the two companies, you'd have always picked the KTM as the hooligan, but weirdly the Ducati is a little bit more of a bike that wants to be wheelied and thrashed and jumped. This will do all that, but this is quite happy going slow, whereas the Hypermotard, it never feels natural going slow on it. It wants to be thrashed around, hooned on, and it wants you to be childish. So if you're newer to biking and maybe less confident, this is the better bike for you. If you're a little bit more experienced and looking for something that's just a little bit more fun and a little bit more childish, get your leg over one of those Ducatis and give it a go. Now, I can't tell you which of the two to buy. If it was me sat here right now, it's a close run thing, but I'm wavering towards the Duke 890. It's just a little bit more rounded, and it does something that I miss really well. It does fast, fun road rides brilliantly. And right now, that's something that I'd really like out of a bike. A lot of the stuff I ride is either stupidly fast or stupid, like the Indian. Love it, but it's stupid. And this is just a brilliant road bike, and right now, I think this is the bike I'd take over the Hypermotard SP. However, if I could have both, I could ride that every day, and then I could just have a Ducati to look at and do wheelies on at the weekend. That'd be ace.